well said.
Welcome to the Hey Joe Show tonight on our special Monday night. Aaron, I know you're excited for the Hey Joe Show to be here finally.
Woohoo!
You have been waiting all week for this.
All week.
You got to understand.
Weeks, really, because we took last week off.
Well, don't tell people that. Those who listen on the audio won't know.
Oh, that doesn't matter. I told the whole world on Facebook last week.
Never mind.
So now everybody knows.
So those of you who are watching this live on Facebook, you now know that last week we were off. However, those of you who only listen to the Hey Joe Show over video or only audio, you're going, I don't know that. But now you do. We're letting you know behind the scenes, right? All right. So tonight, we're going to jump right into the show. I don't know.
Jumping right in.
If we have any other announcements.
Thank you, Light Network. Oh, we love the Light Network. Okay, now we're ready. Let's go.
Obviously, we want to give a shout out to the lightnetwork.tv.
Obviously.
And obviously truth.fm. So if you need to check them out, we encourage you to do so. Tonight, we have a special guest.
So special. But
this season,
don't give him a big ego.
This season, we have been trying our best to bring in guests to help with decision-making case scenarios.
Because we need help with decision making.
We need help.
We can't make decisions ourselves.
That's exactly right. So what we've done is we've brought in teenagers because we wanted to walk through that.
Teenage decisions.
With teenagers, right? Well, the whole concept behind the Hey Joe Show for this particular season was learning how to decipher situations so that we could learn how to think biblically.
Right.
I mean, that was it.
Proactive versus reactive. And we brought in some amazing teenagers.
And we have. We've had a great season with that.
In studio with us. And then when all this social distancing stuff happened, we had some really cool interviews over technology.
Yeah. And it's been interesting to see with all of our podcasts, I'm sure, but those who go live on video, you saw the transition from live in person to what can we do to make the videos work. So we hope that we've worked it out with you. And this season has been great as we've worked through scenarios dealing with emotional issues, dealing with a desire to fit in, the idea of young teenage love, if that's what we call it, right? We've dealt with dealing with parents and the kind of rules that maybe we disagree with, but how should we respond? And so all in all, we really believe this has been a great season. And we've interviewed a couple other individuals.
It's our podcast.
That's right. Well, we're happy with it when a plan comes together.
But it is really good.
I would say an evil plan comes together, but it's not an evil plan. It's a good plan. So, but anyhow, we've actually brought in a few other individuals to interview as well. One was John Thomas, who at the time was in quarantine for COVID-19. The coronavirus, and so we wanted to hear from him. And then we also highlighted the Excel Still More Bible Workshop, which turned out to be a huge success, a virtual workshop during this time. So tonight's guest is no letdown. As a matter of fact, those of you who saw the advertisement or the advertisement on Facebook.
We've been watching a lot of British.
On Facebook, you notice that tonight's guest regularly wears a cape.
Always. Every time I see him.
That's right. And that's because, here you go, that's because throughout all of this, we have heard a lot of first responders, stories from the standpoint of news, from the standpoint of exhaustion. We've heard of individuals who were deemed essential, right? Now, I don't know what that means for the rest of us. Are we just not essential?
I didn't want to tell you, Joe.
Really, are our jobs not that important? Well, some individuals would like us to believe that, right? But there are other individuals that through all of this, they've been standing on the front lines, going to work day in and day out, understanding that as we have been trying to figure all this stuff out with COVID-19, that they had to be out there. And our guest tonight is one of those individuals. That's why he wears a cape on the advertisement on Facebook.
It's really his canine that wears the cape.
That's right, his canine. So tonight we welcome to the show Jonathan Zerperlo. Jonathan, welcome, man.
Hey, Jonathan.
Jonathan, what's going on?
He literally froze up like 2 seconds.
That's great.
2 seconds
so
before we brought him on.
So we're going to try to get Jonathan back.
Come back, Jonathan.
On the Zoom call. But in the meantime,
he's a superhero. Superheroes
that's right.
always show up
in
right
the meantime,
when you need them, right?
As Miss Aaron is trying to get Jonathan back on the call,
I'm trying to get him back on the call.
Let's go ahead and let me tell you a little bit about Jonathan Zapperlo. Jonathan has been a friend of ours and a friend of this show for a number of years. As a matter of fact, he's one of the 3 regular listeners, and we're glad that he is. But
probably top one of the 3.
That's right. But that's not why he is. That's not why he's on the show tonight. At least that's not why we started with him on the show tonight. So hopefully we'll be able to get him back.
We do like having a fan club.
That's right.
It's kind of fun.
Jonathan is a police officer in Richmond Hills, Georgia.
You're not supposed to tell where.
Why not?
I don't know. You're just not ever supposed to tell personal details. That's all I know. It's like the first rule of podcasting.
He's in Georgia, right?
You already gave it away.
Anyhow, he has been on the front lines of this from the get-go. And the ideas of what he deals with day in and day out is something that we want to speak with him about. However, we also want to talk about some things that he used to do. So here's the deal. I've got to reach down here and get my phone. I guess I need to see where he's at.
See, I knew you would come back, Jonathan. I said every good superhero shows up when you need him.
There he is. Let's see if he's connected to his audio yet. Jonathan, can you hear us?
I'm not sure he's connected to his audio yet.
Hold on just a second.
These things take time.
Me help. I don't know if I can help. Maybe I can. All right. Sometimes I've got to do this. All right, man. Connect to your audio. If you can hear us, you got to go down to the bottom left-hand side of your screen.
He's connecting to his audio. Oh, there he is.
All right. We're going to unmute you. Jonathan, can you hear us, my friend?
Whoa.
Right. As soon as you talked about an evil plan, my internet kicked out, and I had to.
Oh, see, Joe, it's your fault.
Do me a favor. Do me a favor and turn your phone sideways. Can you turn your phone sideways? There we go. All right.
Good job, Jonathan. He can follow directions, too. He
can.
is a true superhero.
Individuals just like to see your whole face, not just the long side of it, I guess. So, anyhow, hey, man, I've already introduced you. It was the best introduction ever. I talked about how you are actually the greatest circus worker in the world, and that you're the guy that walks behind the elephants when they're done with their part of the show.
That's right. That's what I do.
So
somebody commented and said that we have to quit calling him Jonathan and we have to call him John, but that just doesn't feel right.
I don't know,
always call
man.
him Jonathan.
I call him Jay
Actually,
Zerp.
I was going to say we really call him Jay Zerp.
Jay Zerp is what we normally go by, but we're trying to be official here.
But whoever this is must be your friend because she said he's a real superhero.
That's right. Oh, all right, man.
You have another friend besides us, John. John. See, I did it, John.
You got to pay it in the garage.
That's right. That's right. Hey, man. All right. So we've introduced you from the standpoint of you being on the front lines as a police officer, but tell a little bit, if you can, about what you do, obviously, and about who your partner is.
Oh yeah. So I've been in law enforcement for the better part of 20 years. I think I'm in my 16th year, if I did my math right. I got started right when I was 18, fresh out of high school. 2 months after I graduated, I was in the police academy, and I've been doing it ever since. I worked at a university for a few years, and then I came to my current job in the city where I work at. I've been doing patrol for a long time. I did traffic enforcement for a little while, and then I went to our high school. It was just me being the sole resource officer there for about 5 years, and there's 2,200 kids in this high school. It's a pretty big high school for our area. And now I left the high school and got a canine partner, and I've had him for about 2 years now. And me and him have been making friends and influencing people for the last 2 years.
Making friends and influencing people. I like the way you said that.
Right.
We're not sure it's for the best.
As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken,
always.
Of course, this could just be legacy. You know, Wyatt Earp had a legacy for him that just was bigger than him. But supposedly you and your canine partner, you have the most arrests in your city, town, county. I'm not real sure what that is.
He may have just told our kids that to make himself sound better. Because one of our sons goes around saying, he holds the record for the most arrests. Like, we know some hero.
That's a big deal, man. That's a big deal. So
I get told I cheat a lot because the dog always finds it. So I'm just a guy with a leash.
Hey, That's all right. He wouldn't do it without you, man. All right, you're partners in this. So anyhow, so we talked a little bit about you told us a little bit about your background. I don't guess I remembered that you worked at a college campus before.
We knew about the high school.
I knew about the high school.
We are interested in talking to you about that, specifically with teens.
Yeah. So, but I didn't know about the college. So you've had a variety of experiences when it comes to working with young people, both at the collegiate level and the high school level at a pretty large school. Of course, I know this as well, that you also have traveled and done some speaking for various events at congregations, dealing with teens and at various lectureships, polishing the pulpit being one, on the things that you have seen. And there's no way in a short, probably 20-minute now interview that we're going to be able to tackle all of that. However, I do want to kind of direct the conversation towards what this season has been about, and that is learning to make decisions. So as we talk about this, I want you kind of to think with me through this and the reasonings behind decisions. Your experience, you've seen a lot. And your perspective, I guess, is going to be fresh for this. So when it comes to the things that you've dealt with, I don't want to ask specifics, but if you could say what are the top maybe three
to five,
three kind of reasons that you have noticed that young people make decisions based upon, what would you say they are? Just kind of why do they decide to do what they decide to do? Are there any that can be maybe categorized? And what are those top two, maybe top three categories?
So I think there's two big ones that I've found when I look at a teenager or a young person who's made a decision. Two, like the ground roots things that I can go to and see why they made that decision is the first one is because they generally come from a broken family. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone that I run into has had that, but it's generally when you go and look at their family background, the family itself isn't stable. There's either a lot of divorce in the situation. Mom and dad are always fighting. That there's something in the family where it's not what you and I might call a wholesome family, where everybody is on the same page religiously. Philosophically, everybody's just kind of doing their own thing. And the family unit itself is pretty broken. Mm-hmm. The second version or the second reason of that, when you look at the decision making from a point that I see it, is the young person generally make that decision, good or bad, based off of how they view themselves. So if how they view themselves and where they feel they get their value from. From those two basic ones is pretty much where I can go in either direction to see what decision they made and why they made it in the first place.
Interesting. Go ahead.
So, just for example, if I look at, we get a lot of calls about young people sharing very X-rated pictures of themselves with a ton of different people. And when you get down to why are they doing that, it's because they really don't understand the value that they have. Mm-hmm. They're searching for kind of a gratification or a reinforcement that they are valuable. And that's one direction they're trying to go because they don't really understand where their value comes from, if that makes sense.
Yes.
No, it does. It does. What's interesting about that is I'm not convinced, and now I would love to discuss this with you, I'm not convinced that those two are mutually exclusive of one another. Well, sure. I mean, because when you start looking at the intent and the purpose of the home, as you know and as you've seen, the lack of stability, the lack of appropriate affection, the structure of the home, the influence of a mother and a father at home, those are things that really do play into the development of a young person as they approach crossroads in life, Right. And if the home is not solidifying and emphasizing the identity of that child, then they're going to be searching for that identity. Would you agree with that?
Sure. So I spoke at a youth event one time, and I was told that a lot of the kids that were coming were just basically friends of other members and stuff. So I started going down the line, people that they told me weren't members of the congregation. I said, what do you think makes you valuable? And hardly anybody could give me an answer that had substance, that had like real substance that you and I would think, as well, because, I've got a mom and a dad, or I've got good looks, I've got the nicest clothes, that gives me value. And to them it might, but when you really dig down deep into that, that's not even remotely close to what gives them value. So we see it a lot with a lot of young people. They really just don't understand it, where they get their value from.
Right. And that is sad to me. I mean, it really is, because in our family Bible study this week, we started studying the book of 1 Peter. And in 1 Peter chapter 1, it's interesting. One of the things that the Apostle Peter does there by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, in the first 12 verses, he reminds them of who they are. Right. He reminds them of their salvation. He reminds them of how special they are to God. What God has done for them. Therefore, in verses 13 through the end of the chapter, actions follow once you remember who you are. And it's just sad to me, because what you're talking about is individuals seeking for something that the home should provide in an ideal situation. But so many of our young people in our world that we're in, they don't have that. And I will say this, we need to be careful not to just talk about this in terms of those who are Christians or aren't Christians, because sometimes young people who grow up in what we would term Christian homes also struggle with their identity, not from a standpoint of I know who I am because I know who my parents are, but I know who I am because I know where my worth comes from. Right. And that's oftentimes what I've experienced, why young people kind of make decisions that they do. An individual who shares an X-rated picture, as you mentioned, an individual who wants to be accepted by a particular group of young people, of other teenagers, so they will adapt the behaviors that will allow them to be accepted into that group. Or the young man or the young woman that longs for the love because they get their value from other people affirming them, and so he or she will give in physically to their girlfriend or boyfriend.
Well, and that's one reason why it was so important for us this season to bring in these real life case scenarios and have teens work through them with us, because, we also have lots of teens that grow up in Christian homes watching this show, and even then you have to think about those decisions ahead of time and how to think through them. And going back to what you all said about the value that you have, because even and how to make those decisions. And that's why it kind of comes full circle. And one reason we're so glad to have you on, Jonathan, is because you have a different perspective on it as well from your occupation.
So here's something I'd like to maybe transition to now, because I do know you a little bit, and we have laughed and talked about your handcuffs and people getting in your squad car when you arrest them, and you make sure they listen to gospel sermons and things along those lines, which is, to me,
yes, he tortures them with Joe's sermons sometimes.
A wonderful opportunity to truly impact people. I guess you would say you have a captive audience. I just made that one. I think I might have heard you say that before. But let me ask you this, from your perspective.
You stole his line.
From your perspective, especially dealing with kids, because I know as a resource officer, there are times that you had to wear the hat of a counselor as well, where you would sit and talk with kids. They would open up to you. You knew them because that was part of your job, was relational as well. So let me ask you this. If you know that the broken home plays a factor and that their identity plays a factor, there are some things that those listening to this, maybe that you can't change. In other words, if a teenager is listening to this tonight, or they'll download the audio, they didn't make the decision to have happen to their parents what their parents decided to do. They weren't asked to be born into a situation maybe where dad was not married to the mother, or dad was never in the picture, right? And so,
or vice versa.
Or the mother decided that she didn't want to be in the picture. So here's my question then. If we're talking about helping young people make better decisions, and we're talking about the thought process of young people making decisions, what are some methods, maybe? What are some things that you did when you were talking with these kids in maybe a one-on-one situation where you really got down to trying to have impact with them? What are some things maybe that you kind of honed in on to help them make better decisions or to modify behavior? What are some maybe one or two things you would recommend on that front?
Yeah, so the first one's going to sound a little bit weird. So when I went into the high school, I was pretty much dropping into a Shark Tank. I mean, these kids can smell fear when I went in there. So there was already a wall up for them to trust me. So when they come in, they're kind of feeling me out, seeing if it's going to be a me versus them or how it's going to work. And whether or not I'm going to be the cool cop, or if I'm going to be the guy who's checking hall passes every 5 seconds. So the hardest part for me was to get them to trust me. Mm-hmm. So in order for me to do that, I had to figure out the way into a teenager's heart. And the easiest way for me, for anybody to get into a teenager's heart, is to go through their stomach.
Nice.
I started bringing food to school with me, and I would literally feed kids. So when you're feeding somebody or giving somebody food, it does more than just fill their stomach. It sends an unsaid message that you care about them. Mm-hmm. Even if it's just a Snickers bar or a bag of candy, nothing huge. So that's how I got into where they would actually trust me and open up about problems that they were having. Once they understood that they could trust me, then we can go farther into problems that they're having, and then they would trust me to give them the guidance that was actually going to be sound, and not something just to say something just to get them to go away. Mm-hmm. They understood that we cared. When you look at Scripture, if I read my Bible right, Jesus fed a lot of people. And you look at that and you go, well, why was he feeding so many people? And for one of the ideas I thought about was, people don't care about their salvation or their soul when they're starving. So if you can get them to know on the face value that I care about you, you can go deeper into their spiritual life and kind of dig deeper into the decisions that they're making. And they trust the decision or the guidance that you're giving them because they understand at the grassroots of it, you care about them.
What's that saying? They don't know. How does that go? They don't know how much you care until they know how much you care.
They don't care what you say until they know that you care.
Yeah, I think we're both messing that up. But
they don't care whatever.
It was going to sound really good.
So I find that interesting, though, is that you bring home a point, and that is you've got to establish a relationship with young people if you're going to help them choose better. In other words, it's not an authoritarian approach, is what you're saying, that works in the long run. An authoritarian approach might work for the short term where an individual wants to avoid getting in trouble, but that's not lasting change. That is change to avoid trouble, not change because it's the right thing. So your approach, number one, was I'm going to build trust, but I like the way you said that. No, you said, I'm going to feed you. Because
Joe agrees with that.
They don't care what you say if their stomach's hurting. And I've actually heard you say that before, and I've read your articles where you've written that, and I thought that was brilliant. The idea is you've got to connect with them if you're going to help.
Oh yeah. So the other part I take of is I want to when I'm talking to you about the decisions that you're making, I don't want you to not make this decision because it's going to take you to the jailhouse or it's going to take you to depression. I'm not showing them. I'm hinting at that, but that's not my goal. Right. Is I want to show them the other decision they can make that will take them to over here where they have a positive self-worth, where they don't care about how people feel about what kind of shoes they're wearing or what their hair looks like that day, or whether they're too skinny or they're overweight. I want to take them to I don't want to sometimes we'll say in church, I don't want to scare you into heaven.
Right.
I don't want you to go to heaven because you're afraid of going to hell, although that is part of it. But the prime reason I want you to go to heaven is so you can be with Jesus, so you can be with all the other Christians. We can, all the great things about heaven. If I can get them to focus on the better decision making and the goals and the achievements that can come from that, I'm not scaring them into that. I want them to see that and understand it.
Right, because that's lasting change, right? And I don't know, maybe, and I would say better than I do, but people can make decisions that include a healthy amount of fear. Sure. That will be lasting. In other words, and you may have seen some of this, especially with like some of the drunk driving campaigns that maybe you participated in there at the high school level, or things like that, right? The idea is this. I've even heard some school systems, some kids, it would be a situation where certain people throughout the day would basically just disappear.
Right.
And so that is supposed to drive home a healthy amount of fear of the brevity of life and the impact that it would have if you were the one that was taken away, or maybe your friend were taken away. Therefore, the fear is, I don't want that to happen, so therefore I will make decisions to avoid that. Does that make sense? Am I saying that right? Yeah. There can be a healthy amount of fear, but ultimately fear, it does not seem to be long-lasting. And so even with their decisions spiritually, you're saying, instead of approaching it spiritually of, I don't want to go to hell, approach it as, I want to be with Jesus and those Christians who are going to be there.
Because you have that fuel behind you of that little bit of fear.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to misinterpret what you said.
No, that's right. For me personally, and I'm not saying, I think the church needs to have lessons on hell. And we need to understand what that is and the repercussions of going there. But for me personally, I prefer to focus on the better part, the more, I guess you'd say, the more enjoyable part of the decision making. Not so much the negative aspect of it, but more so like, look at where you could be, not where look at where you could be going for your better decisions rather than where you could go for the bad decisions.
Right, and that plays into outside of spiritual too. Yeah. I mean, let's think about that. You could talk to a kid who's gotten in trouble maybe for drug use, or maybe there was something that occurred and the dog sniffed drugs on them. There's a couple ways to approach that. You could approach it like, are you crazy? Don't you know this is going to ruin your life? And maybe there's a reason to approach it that way, depending on the circumstance. But there's also a concept eventually in that conversation where maybe you transition from, you have more potential than this. You have a choice to make. You're at a fork in the road. You either choose the right way or the left way, and one of those ways ends up in jail as an adult, but the other way ends up a productive citizen. You know what I'm saying? And so you can lay those out, I guess, is what you're saying, from the standpoint of emphasizing the positive.
So you've also given some positive experiences back when you were at the high school for some of the teens there. So tell us a little bit about one, well, I guess you can call it contest that you did, that you got teenagers involved in a positive activity.
Right. So we had one of our narcotic units seized a car from one of our local drug dealers, and it wasn't anything wild and crazy. It was a decent car that we had, and they initially said, what we normally do with the cars that we get that are seized, they go to an auction, and then car dealers come, they bid on it, and then we get the money and we go buy cool cop stuff, and just circle continues. We go find more cars to seize. So this one, I saw it and I kind of liked it, and I was like, hey, I went to the captain. I said, hey, captain, I'm thinking, what if I took this car, since it's already ours, and we turned it into a police car? And he's like, yeah. I was like, it'll save the city. I think it's like $35,000 to outfit one of our cars. And they liked the idea. And I said, listen, I'm already at the school. What if we made a contest for a high schooler to design the graphics of the car? And so we ran with it. And I think we had close to about 100, 125 entries. And They went from like really basic to really intricate. I mean, somebody drew like a one of our like coastlines down the side of the car. Some students from the graphic design classes, they went all out. I mean, it went wild on some of the designs that they came up with. We picked one. We gave them a cash prize and some other gear from the school.
Cash prize. That's pretty awesome.
That was my car for 2 years.
That was very motivating, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I wish we had a picture to show everybody. I remember seeing it at the time. I don't remember what it looks like, but it was a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, I've got one somewhere.
That would be pretty cool, though. So I'm sure in that whole process, though, even that amount of interaction with the young people kind of brought you in even closer to them. Because then they had, I guess, they had a little bit of say, a little bit of skin in the game is kind of sometimes what we say regarding you and the car, and so they connected with you more. Yeah.
So even though after about 2.5 years, we ended up getting rid of the car, and then when I left the high school, there were 2 other resource officers at the high school. So they got when they got their new cars, they stuck with the same graphic decal that the original kid had designed.
That's pretty cool.
So that's awesome.
They tweaked it just a little bit, mainly just for legal purposes, and then that's going to be the graphic decal they go with for all the cars that they get.
Super cool.
That's pretty cool. All right, so let me ask you this: as young people grow up, obviously into adults, that's the goal, right?
The game.
You're now working with adults, right? And so I want to transition the conversation just a little bit for maybe another 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah, our producer's telling us we got to wrap it
into
up. So we'll,
into adults.
We don't want to cut a superhero off.
That's right. Into adult decision making. Have you found that adults are hesitant maybe to change the way they make decisions, whereas kids are more open to it, or vice versa? Or does it really kind of play into an individual's brokenness, maybe? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that as teenagers grow into adults? And the reason I ask this question, here's why. Because I firmly believe that if you want to have an impact in the church for tomorrow, and by that I mean like down the line, right? I don't mean kids of the church of tomorrow. You've heard my seminars on that. I mean down the line. And if you want to have an impact in society, here's my thinking. You've got to reach them when they're young.
Sure.
Because when they're older, but that's my question. Has your experience been that as teenagers grow into adults, that adults might be more hesitant to alter their decision-making process?
Sure. So I think a lot of adults have this idea that it's too late for me. I've you and I both talked to tons of people about, coming, if you talk about spiritual matters, hey, how about come to services? They go, it's too late for me. I'm the way I am, and that's the way I'm going to be. Mm-hmm. They think it's too late for them to get out of it. And that's a hard wall to break down. Mm-hmm. And I think it goes back to kind of the same idea that they don't really understand their value.
Right.
That even if whether you're like 2 weeks old or you're getting up around 200 years old, the value that you have in God's eyes is still the same.
Right.
And his son didn't die for just the young people who are going to church on Sunday. He died for everybody. He wants everybody to be with him in heaven. And it's some of the preachers that I've listened to, say it's not over until it's over.
Right.
It's always encouraging for me. You see like the people who are 70s, 80s, and 90s up there. They're obeying the gospel, and they've had that realization. It's not too late for me. That's always like really, really encouraging for me. Just see the people who have gone, lived a life of, completely outside the church and outside of God, and they realize it. It's not too late for me.
No, that is encouraging, man. And I ask that because even in areas like the spiritual nature, I saw some studies at one time in my ministry that talked about young people, and that if they did not obey the gospel by the time they were 16, that the likelihood of them obeying the gospel went down considerably. It didn't leave totally, but it went down considerably But part of that, I wonder if it fits into the idea of what you've talked about. In other words, as they transition into their 20s, maybe even into their 30s, life is all before them. They don't have time for stuff. And then when they get to a point where life is messed up, again, that may be where they start thinking it's too late. But it is encouraging to me to see individuals who recognize that it doesn't matter how old you are, as long as there's breath in your lungs, that you can still come to the Lord and you can still change your life and turn it around. And I guess in this season of the Hey Joe Show, the idea was learning how to think biblically, but ultimately what we talked about tonight is learning how to think biblically on the big scale. And that is this: it's never too late to make the right decision.
Sure. I think one of my favorite examples, and if I can take like 2 seconds to tell it.
I don't know.
Like 2 hours.
I know the producer.
Listen, I would drive up there and lock your producer up.
Go ahead, brother.
When you talk about like somebody and finding their true value, the person I love to go to is Jacob and his wife. Most of the time when you think of, if I ask most Christians, who is Jacob's wife, we all go to Rachel. We always go to Rachel, but everybody forgets Leah. And if you look at Leah's life and the scripture that it talks about with Leah, if there was ever someone who felt alone, who felt betrayed, who felt just heartbroken, and if anybody in scripture could feel that way, it was her. Your dad had to trick someone into marrying you.
Yeah,
that's bad.
It brings up a lot of questions, doesn't
it? And you think about that, how did Leah feel knowing every time she looked at her husband, when he was looking back at her, he was thinking about Rachel.
Right.
And when you look at the big scheme of that, somebody who who may not know her value would have been Leah. But when you look at the big picture of it, in the biblical story, Rachel is very, very important. But when you look at their children, Leah had Judah, and from Judah comes Christ.
Right.
The biblical account doesn't happen without Leah. And when you look at that, you can just kind of picture God sitting back going, "You are so important to me, and you have no idea why." I just picture her just sitting there in a tent, wondering how important she really is.
Right.
But if she could, she can't see the picture because she's sitting on the frame. But in the grand scheme of things, she is so important to the whole biblical account. You take out Leah, you take out Jesus. It's when you look at like our lives, if she was that important for in God's into bringing Christ to us, how much more important are we for whom that descendant of Leah ends up dying for us? Our value is so incomprehensible to us. It's hard for me to even me to fully grasp it, and I think I have a kind of a good idea on it. But it's hard for me to wrap my brain around that infinite notion of how valuable I am, that you are, or the drug dealer, or the person who's just wrapped up in all kinds of moral behavior, how valuable that they still are in spite of everything that they've done.
Right. Which goes back to what you said at the beginning then, is the decisions that you see a lot of teenagers making are based upon 2 things. The brokenness of the home ties into their lack of understanding their identity. So they're searching for something. And in all of that, what you're saying is the identity needs to be rooted and grounded in their value in the eyes of God, seen in the fact that he gave Jesus to die for us instead of in all these other things.
It kind of sounds like Jazer knows what he's talking about.
I tell you what, we had him on the show for a reason. Hey, brother, I hate to do this, but we're going to have to go ahead and get off of the show.
But we could go another hour.
I could.
Hour and a half.
I love speaking with you, man.
There's so many questions I didn't even get to ask that are just sitting here in my brain now.
Well,
and I will never forget.
She will have to. She'll have to send you a text. That's right.
Thank you for that one. I will never forget that.
We'll do a part two. Well, when you said that, they're sitting on they can't see the picture because they're sitting on the frame. First thing that came to my mind was my experience with young people who make bad decisions are oftentimes they see in such short frames, short pictures. In other words, why does the teenager act in immoral ways with the person they're dating because they can't see outside of Friday night. They can't see outside of Saturday night. Why is it that young person believes that group of friends are worth changing everything to fit in because they can't see outside of that window, right? They're too close. And that's what happens as they grow. Hopefully, perspective is had. And the problem, I'm sure, comes up as adults when perspective is never gained until it is one of those things that they're in prison. And then that's when they're, looking out the bars and going, why did I end up here? Oh, I know why I ended up here. So the goal is to stop it before it gets there. And all these things that we've been talking about haven't been to avoid prison.
Or even other mental things.
Or even other mental issues. They've been learning from a guy who's worked with young people on the reasons people make decisions and what we might be able to do to help, especially teenagers. So, Jonathan, thanks for coming on the show, man.
We appreciate our superhero, Jazer.
All right. We want to give a shout out again to thelightnetwork.tv. Check them out when you can. Thelightnetwork.tv.
Yes.
And also truth.fm. If you have not gone to either one of those, obviously we want you to. Check us out on kylepublications.org. We've got some very exciting resources that are coming out and are coming out in the future that we don't want to let you know about yet, but we're going to kind of plug.
One of them might have to do with a certain superhero that was on our show tonight.
Yes.
Well, that'd be nice. You talking about a book that he's writing?
Yeah, I think he.
Man, that'd be awesome.
I think he talked about a book.
I think he may have. Maybe
he'll get it done one of these years.
One of these years.
While I'm still in the publishing game. I don't know. Maybe he will.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a great evening, and God bless.
Good night.
Please hang up and try again.